Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us in person and online. Today's class is actually a relatively short, it's a shorter parak, shorter chapter of the Tanya. And it's a pretty straightforward chapter. So it should be pretty simple to get through it. And it's a continuation from last week. And last week, we mentioned that when we do a mitzvah, we are getting a hug from God. A mitzvah is we enter God's embrace. The mitzvah surrounds us. The mitzvah surrounds us and engulfs us from all sides. We are embraced within the mitzvah, which we said the mitzvah is one with God. So when you are embraced within the mitzvah, you are embraced by God himself, which is a beautiful concept to think about. Today, we're going to talk about the next step, which is studying Torah. Generally speaking, we say there's two types of things that we do. There's doing mitzvot and there's studying Torah, which, as we're going to get to at the end, studying Torah is one of the mitzvot, but it is a different level of the mitzvah. And so we said that when you do a mitzvah, you are connecting with God in an external way, in a way of clothing. Well, we compared it to putting on clothing, where the clothing completely surrounds you, and you are completely within the clothing that you are wearing. We're going to describe today when you study Torah, when you connect with your Torah study, it's not just in an external way like clothing, rather it is internal like food. When we eat food, we don't put the food outside our bodies, we put the food inside our bodies. And we're going to see all the different ways we're going to compare studying Torah to eating food, which of course is talking about a spiritual food, right? Just like we spoke about, the clothing was more of a spiritual clothing. The food of studying Torah is going to be a spiritual food for our souls. Now we're going to see that the connection that we make through doing mitzvot, as we mentioned, it's external. It's also only temporary. You put the clothing on, you take the clothing off. It doesn't become part of you. It doesn't change who you are. And the truth is, it's very similar to doing a mitzvah. You can do a mitzvah, and then you could go on about your day, and not necessarily going to become a changed person. It could, but it won't necessarily change who you are. And if you don't continue to connect with the mitzvah and continue to do more mitzvah, eventually that mitzvah is going to fade, and you're going to lose your whole connection that you built through doing the mitzvah. Because it's in the moment. Looks like you want to say something.
No, I'm listening.
Okay. Torah, on the other hand, becomes part of who we are. It changes who we are as a person. When you study Torah, it becomes part of you, and it changes you forever. You become a different person. You become part of the Torah that you studied, becomes who you are as a person, and as we're going to see, it affects your entire life. We mentioned previously the story of the Hasidim that were traveling to visit the Rabbi in Russia, right? In the cold Russian winter. And we spoke about how it's freezing cold, and they're traveling. And I believe actually was Shmuel Munkis, who was a famous Chassid. He was traveling to visit his Rebbe. He was walking because he didn't have any money. And he caught a tramp on the way, right? Somebody came by with the wagon and said, "I'll give you a ride." And as he was riding in the back of the wagon is filled with barrels of wine or whiskey. Something, something strong was in the barrels as he's riding in the back of the wagon. He's freezing cold, and he's looking at these barrels of whiskey or wine, and he says, if I put some of that inside of me, I'll be warm. But here it is right next to me. I'm sitting between these barrels of this warmth, and it's not affecting me in any way because it's just on the outside. It's not coming in. It's not changing who I am. It's not making an effect on me. So clothing is on the outside, it surrounds us, but it doesn't come inside of us. And therefore it doesn't really affect us. Whereas food, if you take that whiskey, you drink the whiskey, now you become warm inside, it changes you, it makes an effect on you.
Is this true for any knowledge or specific?
We're gonna get there. Great question, we're gonna get there. Okay, so what happens when you study something? When you have a new concept and you're gonna start studying this concept, So first, you engross yourself into the subject matter, into the content that you're studying, right? So you put yourself into the content that you're studying. Now you are inside this idea, this intellectual thing that you're studying at the moment. Your mind is now enveloped within that idea. And then as you continue to study, eventually that idea is in your mind. So your mind is grasping the concept, and the concept is fully grasped within your mind. The Tanya says in both ways that way. It seems to be a double way of saying it, but it's actually making a strong point over here. So again, let me repeat that. At the time that you're studying something, your mind is fully engrossed in that subject matter. When you understand the subject, now that subject is fully engrossed within your mind. It is enveloped, is grasped within your mind. Your mind is holding on to it, and it surrounds it. And the subject matter is now surrounded by your mind. Forever, as we're going to say. Yeah.
Even people short term memory? Like you go to the fridge, you don't know what one.
So, when we're talking here about, as you'll see, and what we're talking here, when we say studying something, we're talking about studying it thoroughly, where you fully understand it. We're not talking about where something, kind of comes and goes, and, you open the fridge, and that's not study. Study means that it becomes, you put your mind into it until you fully understand, to the best of your capacity, you understand that subject matter. Now is when it becomes part of you, because it changes your way of thinking. So as we say, you wrap your head around it, right? You're studying something, you wrap your head around something. Now, when your hand grasps onto something, if I'm holding onto this bottle, I'm holding onto it, I'm grasping it right now, I'm surrounding it, right? But what happens if I let go? It's gonna fall. It fall, right? If you let go, it falls. It doesn't stay in your hand because it's not connected. It's not one with my hand. It's two separate things. When I let go, it falls, it separates. So it's two different things that are just next to each other at the moment. It doesn't become one.
They're connected to the amount of time you put in.
As long as I'm holding on to it, it's connected. But as soon as I let go, it's not really one. It's just being held together. It's two separate objects that are sitting together. Thoughts are not like that. Knowledge, and again, we're talking about really understanding a subject matter. Knowledge becomes one with the person, that it doesn't separate afterwards. It becomes one with the object. It becomes one with your mind. Those thoughts are now part of your mind. And when you have another, when you look at another piece of information, you're basing what every new information that comes to mind is all you take into account, all your previous knowledge that you know, right? Yeah. Whatever every knowledge you have from previously that you understood in a previous time is now going to affect how you think about the next thing.
As opposed to you pick something up, you're not holding everything you ever held.
Exactly. You put it down, you move on. But your thoughts become part of who you are and how you think and how you are going to look at the next thing next knowledge, next information that you acquire. So in this way, it really becomes who you are, and it affects you forever, because everything is going to be based on this knowledge for the future. Now, you asked before, what about other knowledge? What about something that's not Torah knowledge? Does it apply to everything, or is it specifically to Torah? So the answer is, the general idea, yes, applies to everything, right? Your thoughts do, if you really acquire a knowledge, you think about it well, and you study something, it becomes who you are, and it's how you continue to think. But when you acquire knowledge, what did you acquire? Knowledge. You got some information. But what did we say about Torah? Torah and God are one. It's not God's Torah. Torah is God, because God and the Torah are all one. Remember from the Rambam, from the Maimonides, we said that usually when a person is thinking something, you have the person who has the knowledge, you have the knowledge itself, you have the thought process, you have the thing that you're thinking about, all different entities that exist. With God, we said it's all one. God is the knower. He is the knowledge. He is the thought process. He is the thing that he's thinking about. It's all one with God. So when you acquire knowledge of Torah, when you acquire Torah and it becomes part of who you are, what is becoming part of you now? God. You become one with God, which is something that's completely unique to Torah, because only Torah is the entity itself, is God itself, which you don't have with any other knowledge, any other information. So when you study something in Torah, you study a Torah law, you open up a Talmud, you'll find much of the Talmud discusses topics that are not godly at all. They seem very mundane. I'll talk about what happens if person A and person B get into an argument. Person B says this, and person A says this. Person B says this. Then the law is going to be as follows. It's a very mundane situation where two people are fighting about a loan or something, right? It seems to be something that is so disconnected from anything spiritual, from anything godly. But why is that the case? Why is it that if person A says this and person B says this, then we're going to do that? Why is that the reason? Not because that's what makes sense, but because that is what God desired. We study Torah to understand God's way of thinking, which is God's desire. Now, you may think the Torah, why do we have Torah law? We have Torah law because what happens if two people are arguing? What happens if person A and person B are having an argument? You want to know what to do. So we need the Torah to tell us what we should do in such a case. That seems logical. But it's not what it is. It's in fact the other way around. The reason why we have the world, the reason why we have the reality that we live in, is in order for there to be a place for God's knowledge and God's wisdom to come to reality. It says, our sages tell us that when God created the world, what did he use as the blueprints for the world? He looked in the Torah, and he studied the Torah and used that as the blueprints for creating a world.
So the Torah existed before.
The Torah existed before the world, not in the not in the physical sense, but the physical side of Torah is only the manifestation of the real part of Torah, which the deeper part, which is God's wisdom, which is God himself. So when we study a argument or a concept in Torah, where person A says this and person B says that, therefore we're going to do this, we are right now connecting with God's wisdom directly, and as we said, connecting with God directly, because it's one and the same.
Why are we differentiating from God and God's wisdom?
I'm not. I'm just to help you understand. That's why I keep going to the next step. God's wisdom is only to tell you that it's God himself. Because the truth is, you cannot grasp God. It's impossible. How can we connect God? How can we become one with God? How can the finite connect with the infinite? And how can we understand God's knowledge? We can't understand what God understands. We're nothing. We're puny, right? If you're looking, you're comparing.
We're nothing. I don't.
Well, let me explain. Let me finish the thought. If you look at God, right, and an ant, where do we fall in between the two? Where are we on this scale between an ant and God? Where are we? We're right there. We're just above the ant. You can't even tell the difference. It's a blip on the radar. Because compared to the greatness of God,
okay,
we're small. Now, what does that mean? We're actually no, not at all. God created the world. The whole purpose of the entire creation was for you. Specifically for you. It says we're gonna study later in Tanya. It brings from the Talmud. It brings a statement. A person has to think, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. The whole world was created for me. That's not meant to make you haughty. It's meant to give you a sense of responsibility, right? To know that this all lies on your shoulders. So it's no small thing over there. But the idea is, we cannot grasp who God is. We cannot connect with God truly on the ultimate level. But God gave us a way to connect with him. God said, I want to have a relationship with you. We spoke about this earlier. God says, I want a relationship with you. Therefore, I'm going to take God and God's wisdom and God's whole, the essence of God. We're going to take the essence and we're going to contract it down to something that you can grasp in your mind. And through studying Torah and through understanding Torah, you are connecting and becoming one with God himself, which is literally impossible, but yet we're doing it anyway. And so when we study a law in the Torah, that law is God's will. It's not because that's what makes sense, it's because that is what God decided. That's the way God wants it to be. And therefore, when you study Torah law, you may study a case that has never happened and will never happen. Such a case is such a far-fetched case that nobody's ever going to say this and that person say that and that person. It's never going to happen. So why do we bother studying something that's never going to happen? Because we're not studying it to apply it to law. We're studying it to acquire God's wisdom. We're studying it to connect with God. It doesn't matter if it happens or not. It's not relevant. We're not studying it because we want to know what to do in such a case. Obviously, we need to do that as well. We have to study the Torah law so we know how to apply the Torah law. But in a deeper sense, as we're going to get to a little bit further, we'll talk about a little bit more. But the idea is that when we study Torah, we're studying Torah to connect with God. That is our main purpose. And that is why we're doing it. And so if it actually happens or not, if there's any relevancy or not, doesn't matter. Doesn't change our study of the Torah. There is a story of a great rabbi named Rabbi Meir Simcha, who he was a great Torah sage, and he was a holy man. He was a Rebbe, and he would often, lock himself in his room in his study, and he would study Torah on his own in his quiet, in the place. One of his students needed to know, how does the Rebbe study Torah? I need to understand, how does the Rebbe do it? I want to do this. I want to be like the Rebbe, right? I want to learn from his ways. And so he really wanted to know what goes on when the Rebbe studies Torah. So what did he do? He's a bit of a smart aleck. He went into the Rebbe's room before the Rebbe got in there, hid in the closet, and he was peeking, watching to see what happens, to see how the Rebbe studies Torah. Sure enough, the Rebbe comes in, sits down, he opens up his Talmud, his Gemara, and he starts studying, and he's studying out loud. We mentioned previously, when you study Torah, you have to say the words out loud. So he's saying the words out loud, and he's studying, and he's discussing, and he says the question and the answer, and he's going back and forth, and he's all engrossed in the study, until he comes to a place in the Talmud he doesn't understand something. The Rebbe's stuck, and he's trying to look at it this way, that way, he's arguing back and forth, and he can't understand what's going on in the Talmud. He's stuck. After trying for a little while, he realizes he's not going to get it, so the Rebbe stands up, he goes to the corner of the room, and he starts to pray to God. He prays to God, and what is he praying? He's praying out loud. So this man over here is the Rebbe's prayers. And the Rabbi Meir Simcha is praying, and he says, God, help me, give me love. Give me true love, the ability to love you, God. I want to love you with all my heart. Give me the ability to love you. And he prays, he finishes praying, he goes back to the Talmud, he sits down, and he comes up with the solution, and he understands it all, and he says the answer to the question, and beautiful. He gets it. At this point, this young man who's hiding in the closet can't take it any longer. He comes, falling out of the closet. He says, Rebbe, I don't understand. Please explain to me what just happened. So the Rebbe says, well, you didn't understand the answer. Shall I explain it to you? He says, no, I got the answer. It's beautiful. But I don't understand. You stood up to pray because you couldn't understand you didn't have the answer to the question, right? So you went to pray. So I would think you should go and pray for wisdom. Go and pray for the wisdom so you'll have the answer. But you didn't pray for wisdom. You prayed for love. Why are you praying for love? So the Rebbe said, I don't need wisdom to understand God. It's not about knowing God. If I want to understand God's desires, if you really love someone, you understand what they want, what they need. You understand their desires. You understand what they want out of life. If I am not able to understand what God wants in this case, it must be I'm lacking in my love for God. So I pray to God, give me more love, give me the ability to love you properly, so that then I'm able to understand what you want and what you need. So this is what Torah actually is. So when you study Torah, you are doing something impossible, like we said. You are grasping something that cannot be grasped. You're grasping God himself. And you are completely immersed in God. Your mind becomes one with God, because we said your mind envelops the idea, the concept, which is God's wisdom, which is God. And it is fully enveloped within you. And you also are surrounded by the idea, by the concept, which is God's wisdom, which is God. So you become one with God. It becomes one with your mind, with your brain, with your way of thinking. You and God become one, which is the ultimate. Now, usually, if you take two objects and you mix two things together.
Israel called.
So if you were to take, let's say, some salt and put it in water, and you make salt water, you made something new out of salt and water.
I need a shield.
So if you take two different things, you take salt and water, you mix them together, and now you made salt water. Is it possible to separate the salt from the water?
No.
It is. It is. You can dry it out. You could get that water back out of. You could get the salt back out of the water. It is possible. Sure.
Yeah.
You can do desalination, or you can dry out the water. You can do. There is. It's always possible to separate two things again. And it goes to every level. H2O is hydrogen and oxygen. You are able to separate the hydrogen from the oxygen again and come back to what it was originally. Every two objects in this world that become one can always be separated and come back into two separate things. Except for knowledge. Knowledge in your brain can never separate and become two separate things again. It becomes one with your brain. It is one and one forever, and it can never be separated again. It says even if a Torah scholar were to go and do sins, do averot, right? You've studied Torah, and really everyone, we study some Torah. Once the Torah becomes one with us, even if we were to then do a sin, it doesn't separate. The Torah becomes part of us and stays part of us forever. You can never separate a person from his Torah knowledge. So now, with all this in mind, now let's compare what we studied in last parak, in the last chapter, and in this chapter. In last chapter, we said when you do a mitzvah, you are putting on the clothing. You're clothing yourself within God's will, within God's mitzvah. You're surrounding yourself by God's mitzvah. In this chapter, we say that when you study Torah, the Torah becomes one. God becomes one with you internally, like food. Like we digest it, it becomes one with us. So which one is on a higher level? Torah study is a much deeper connection than we get with mitzvot. Now, I do want to say, this is one of the biggest questions that come up as you study Chassidut or other subjects. This question comes up again and again and again. What is greater, Torah study or the action of mitzvot? And the answer is not always the same. So in this scenario, we're saying that Torah is higher. At other places, we say mitzvot are higher, because it all depends on what perspective you're looking at. Just want to put that out there. This is not a definitive final answer. This is just the answer here. In other places, the answer may be different, depending on the context that we're talking about. But as we're saying here, the Torah is much higher than the mitzvot, because the connection that we make with Torah is a much higher and deeper connection than when we do mitzvot. And as we said, this applies to every subject matter. You can be studying mathematics. You can be studying science. You can be studying philosophy. Whatever you're studying, when you study a subject matter, it becomes one with you. It becomes one with you, and you connect with it on a higher level. But Torah, we said, is unique because Torah, you connect with the giver of the Torah, you connect with God who is one with his Torah. But as we mentioned previously, studying Torah doesn't mean to just kind of, flip through it and say, okay, now I got it, right? I read it. And you say, you know what, I'm not going to really understand it anyway, so why bother? Am I ever going to really understand the Torah? I'm never going to get it. So just whatever, I accept. Okay, what you say is true. Okay. That's not studying Torah. Studying Torah is to apply ourselves to it and to really try to get down to the nitty gritty and try to understand it properly, do the best that we can. But at the same time, we have our limitations, right? Different people have different levels of understanding. We can't always understand everything to its fullest capacity, and it's not necessarily expected of us. So there isn't you have to get it fully and understand every concept. And there also isn't this idea of just accepting. You have to apply yourself, do the best you can, understand it to the best of your ability. And with that, it becomes one with you because it connects to your mind, your brain on your level of understanding. So I mentioned previously that Torah is food. How is Torah compared to food? Let's look at food for a moment, right? You take a bagel, you consume that bagel, you consume the food, and that food becomes part of you. It becomes part of your flesh and blood, and it becomes actually a part of who you are as a person. And then you live off the energy of the food that you just ate. Right? It gives you the capacity to keep going. The same exact thing applies to Torah. You take the Torah, you consume it. It comes inside of you, becomes part of you. It becomes one with you. It connects with your mind, with your intellect, with your way of thinking. It becomes one with you. It goes through your veins, through your blood, it becomes part of who you are as a person. And then spiritually, we live off that energy that's in the Torah. It stays within us and gives us the energy to live and to go forward. Just like when we eat some Torah, eat some food. Sorry, don't eat the Torah.
No?
Now, when you study Torah, people study in all different levels. Sometimes people study Torah for reward. Look at a child, right? You tell a child, I'm going to give you a prize, and give you a candy, and give you something if you study the Torah. Or the opposite could be for you're scared of a punishment, right? If you don't study, you're going to get, you'll get punished. Imagine a kid in school, right? The kid doesn't necessarily want to learn. If you don't study properly, you're going to get sent to the principal's office. But this is not just kids. We do this as adults too. We study for a reward. The reward may not be a candy or a prize. It may be we want God to take care of us. We want God to give us our needs. Or we don't want to get punished. People are worried of, that bolt of lightning that's coming out of the sky, right? we're worried but in a more serious level, we're worried about going to hell maybe. We're worried about punishments that can come. People tend to do things for all kinds of ulterior motives. Or on a higher level, I study Torah because I want to know how to behave. I want to know what to do. It's a much higher level, right? Or I study Torah because I want to be a great Torah sage. I want to be respected as a Torah sage. So there are many different reasons why a person may study Torah. Or I study because I enjoy it. I like to study the Torah. It's an intellectual exercise. It's very interesting. It's enjoyable. I like it. But that's all not the purpose. That's not the reason for studying Torah. When we study Torah properly, the word is lishma. Lishma means for its own sake. You have to study Torah for the sake of studying Torah. That is the ultimate level. Now, again, it doesn't mean that anybody who's not on the ultimate level shouldn't study Torah. On the contrary, everyone should study Torah to the best that they can, on the level they can, even if it's about fear of punishment, which is, I'd say, the lowest of the low, right? Even someone who's studying just so he shouldn't get punished, he should also study Torah. Because starting there, you have to start somewhere and you build up. Hopefully, you build a connection to the Torah, so you want to study more. But to study Torah properly, it has to be lishma, for its own sake, for the sake of studying Torah. But what does that mean to study lishma? When I say to study Torah for the sake of the Torah, what does that mean practically? So there are different explanations given in different places. But let's look what it says here in the Tanya here. Tanya here says, what does it mean to study Torah lishma, for its own sake? is to study Torah in order to connect to God. My purpose of studying Torah is because it's God's Torah. It's God's wisdom. It is God. I want to become one with God. I want to connect with God. The way to connect with God is by studying Torah. So I'm studying Torah for the purpose of the Torah because I want to become one with the Torah. And that is studying Torah lishma for its own sake, as it brings it here in the Tanya.
Do you know how to spell Lishma?
Lamed Shin Mem He.
Okay.
On the other side, the opposite of that, our sages say that one of the reasons why we were exiled, one of the reasons why the land of Israel was laid in ruins, is because people would study Torah. They would learn Torah very diligently. They would really be into it. But when they studied Torah, they would forget the giver of the Torah. They would study Torah for intelligence. It was interesting. It was great things. They really enjoyed it. But they didn't look at it as a godly book, as I'm studying the Torah, connecting with God who gave the Torah. And by doing that, they missed the whole point. And that's why it's important to study the Torah lishma. Remember, you're studying the Torah for the sake of connection with God with the Torah.
And there were no great men at the time who could say, hey,
Of course there were. There were great prophets.
okay,
But the people didn't listen. That's always our problem, right? We have many guys who show us the way, but we don't listen. We're stubborn.
Shani, yes.
That's it. A stiff-necked people, right?
Yeah.
That's what we are. But it's a positive too. We have to use this so it's to channel the stubbornness for good things. That's the idea. And so he finishes off this chapter. We get to the very end of the chapter. He points out that when we compare Torah and mitzvot, we're looking at them as two different things. Where we say the Torah is internal, it's food. It gives us life force, it gives us energy because it becomes one with us. Whereas the mitzvot are clothing, they're external, they're the outside. It's things that give us warmth and connection from the outside. The truth is, when you look at Torah, Torah really has both aspects. Because it is a mitzvah to study Torah. When you are studying Torah, you're doing one of the 613 mitzvot. So therefore, when you study Torah, you actually get both of them at the same time. You're acquiring the knowledge, the wisdom that comes with the Torah that becomes one with you, that becomes your food. And you're also getting that embrace, that hug from God at the same time, because you're doing a mitzvah, you're following God's will at this time. And so when you study Torah, you're getting both at the same time, which is the ultimate connection, both internal and external, and we have a full embrace and internal connection with God that goes on when we study Torah. So it's a good idea to study Torah. So I didn't want to give this earlier because doesn't really isn't much on here, but just a little bit because a little bit of a good follow-up to the class, which is if we kind of look over the last 4 chapters that we've studied, and we kind of see the progression that we're saying here about our godly soul, our divine soul, and its different parts to it. So we said in chapter 2, we spoke about the essence of our divine soul, which we said they're connected with tzaddik to connect to your most inner self. Right? Remember, we spoke about this through connecting to the holy people of the generation. They give us the ability to connect to our true self inside. Chapter 3, we spoke about the structure of our divine soul. We said contemplate the divine to give birth to lasting emotions and attitudes. Right? So we had the structure was the 10 sefirot, and we spoke about there how when we connect to God through our intellectual capacities, through contemplating, it gives birth to the emotions, to the 7. So we have the 3 intellectual capacities, give birth to the 7 emotional capacities. Chapter 4, we spoke about the clothing, which was we embrace with God through mitzvos that are an outpouring of your soul. And finally, now in chapter 5, we have bonding. Bond with God by wrapping your head around His innermost will and wisdom in Torah. And this is the Tanya's introductions of the divine soul, and I believe next week already we start talking about the other soul, which we spoke about previously, which is the animal soul.